guys, it's Sophie, and I can't believe it's already time for a February wrap up. The end of February has come around so fast. I know it's a short month, but it just feels like it's just sped on by. I normally try not to do my wrap ups until the very last day, but I'm actually going to be busy over the next few days because it's my birthday on the 27th of February, so I'm doing it a little bit early, so I may finish off another book or maybe even two before I get to the 28th, but I thought I would just film it and then you can have it for that day instead rather than having it late like next weekend instead. So hopefully you enjoyed this video. I'm going to split it up into two sections. We're going to do non-fiction first and fiction after. So the first one that I have to talk to you about is The Art of War by Sun Tzu. This is a really old philosophical text about war, about the nature of war and about how to engage in war. This edition actually has two different books in it, so it has The Art of War and it also has a selection of the sayings of Wusu, who was another, I think, general, military leader. I got this one because I was trying to find my book on war for my Read Hard challenge, but I just really didn't like this. I think the thing I found most irritating was how this was sort of sold as a book to take through with you into life, and I don't think that you should engage with life and work and friends and family the same way you would war, and I don't think that it's good or healthy to consider everything as an enemy or something to be overcome all the time, and I think that irked me more than anything else. It's the kind of thing that's vaguely interesting to me, but it was never going to really be my cup of tea, I don't think, and I don't think I really got much from it, but because it had this weird business and personal angle, it kind of tainted all of it. It felt for example, there's a whole section on the employment of spies, which was quite entertaining, but the idea that someone is oh yeah, I should make sure this girl really likes me by trying to get her friends to come and tell her what she's like, and rather than just engaging with the person directly and not seeing them as something to confront, I don't know, just didn't really gel with my own sort of moral philosophies, I guess. But I know lots of other people I've spoken to really like this book. I did like the fact that it wasn't saying that war is the only answer to issues, and I mean the second half, there's a phrase which says the only just war is one in which you're freeing people from tyranny. Everything else has a motive that isn't moral, and people will still engage, but it isn't something that you can justify with a moral background, unless you are restoring order or overturning there isn't really a reason to go to war that is selfless, which I thought was quite interesting, and also Sun Tzu recommends not fighting as often as possible, and to try and do as much as you can with diplomatic means before you would engage, and those kind of things I think were interesting to me, but this weird pseudo business personal thing just made it weird. Do you know, I think I'm even going to have to split this into two videos because of how much I just rambled about that first one, and I feel these might be rambly videos, so there's going to be two. I'm sure you'll be fine with that. So the next one I have is Justice by Micheal J. Sandel, and this is a book that talks about morality and about the ways in which people make moral decisions and the different kind of philosophies that play into moral decisions. And I found this absolutely fascinating. I love this book, and to be fair, to the book itself, I do have this added element of the fact that I have been reading this book, and a subscriber mentioned that there were lectures of this book available as well, recorded ones from Harvard, and that sounded really interesting, and I ended up checking them out, and it's kind of turned into this thing that my boyfriend and I will come around and sit down and watch Justice and then pause it and debate because our views really differ, and that in itself has been really enjoyable. So just sort of for transparency's sake, I have got this added element that makes me like it even more, but I really do think it's a really good book. I went for this being very new to this kind of study in this area, and I found this totally approachable. I think that it dealt with some really interesting areas that I'd kind of thought my way around and into, but never had a name for, so that was really interesting for me because I don't know, it kind of gave me some words to explain the things I'd come across already in my life. And I think that he does a good job of not putting too much of his own opinion into what he's saying. So even when he does the lectures, you can kind of see him taking one side, taking another side. And whilst there is a short section at the back where he's putting across his own view, I genuinely think that this is a good way to like grab little bits of information on lots of different kinds of thinking. And overall, I just really enjoyed it, and I'm so excited to go and try and read more about it, and maybe more from him as well. So yeah, I had an awful lot of fun with it, and this is going to be, so remember I'm doing my 12 important books, this is going to be one of my 12 important books, so I managed to get one in January, one in February. I'm doing well so far, but just because it was such intellectual fun, I think, for me, and yeah, I as I say, I'm absolutely dying to get into more of this topic and more of his writing. And then the next one I have is one that I had wanted to get to for ages, and I'm really happy that I got the chance to give it a read, and that one is Another Day in the Death of America by Younge. Now, lots of people have already spoken about this, and there have been a few really good review videos on this, so I expect you've heard about this book already. So I'm not going to go too much into depth with it, but I am going to just give you a brief overview of what the book is about before we jump into my reaction to it. So the author chooses a 24-hour period of history and looks at the gun deaths for people under the age of 20 that have occurred within that 24-hour period, and there are 10 people who die on the day that he chooses, and he explores the lives and backstories of those 10 people who are no longer with us. This was like incredibly hard-hitting. Like, the very first story that you open up is a 9-year-old little boy who is shot in the face answering the door to his stepdad. He's getting up, he's getting ready for school, and his little brother's trying to explain over the phone to the 911 operator like what's happened to him, and the rest of the stories give you that same like feeling of like being like hit by this, and he does a really good job at like just the kind of journalistic element of how close he gets to these families where he can, and some of these families he can't get all that close to. They aren't willing to talk to him, or there's just not all that much information about it. He goes on Facebook, he goes on the children's like social media sites and tries to find out who they were. But I think what this book does is just brings a face and a name to gun violence, and I think that's what Younge was trying to do, was personalise something that we all know about from statistics. And reading it as someone who lives in the UK, it does feel very foreign and I have a very visceral response of sort of, this is such an easy thing to fix, and it does make me very frustrated. I understand his desire to focus on children as well, because obviously that's a very emotive, sort of evocative group of people, but I kind of wanted to see some adult stories in there too. But I understand that probably would have been too long for a book, but I wanted like a wider picture of it as well. I think that's probably one of my few criticisms of it, is he sort of goes on about how you don't make these people babes in innocence, so you don't just think of the most guiltless, the most worthy of life sort of individuals. You think about the fact that, do we want this to happen to anyone? And I would have liked to have had a few adult people mixed in, I think, just so that I didn't feel as though I had this underlying feeling still that we're still going for those who are the most sort of protected, as in children. But other than that, I really enjoy it, and I think if you've been a holdout like I was, it's well worth a read. It is a hard read, and you do need to have a little bit of time, I think, between each story, just to give yourself like a minute to kind of get back from it. But it's really good, and everything that everyone else has been saying, I think, stands still. So there you go. Okay, and the very last non-fiction, and therefore the last one for this video, is Against Empathy by Paul Bloom. Now, I'm actually going to make a video talking about books that I don't agree with more widely, but just for now we're going to focus on this one, and I'll have that up at some stage soon. But the reason I picked up this book is because I didn't agree with the title, essentially, in that I feel that empathy is a valuable trait, and I feel as though encouraging people to develop the sense of empathy is something that's positive. Now, this book sees empathy in a very different way to the way that I would view empathy, and I think I actually agree with Paul Bloom on nearly every point in this book, but what we disagree on is the definition of empathy. So, broadly, he speaks of empathy as like a gut emotional response to suffering that we see in others. So quite literally like that mirroring of emotions. So a loved one hits their thumb with a hammer and you flinch because you kind of mirror that emotion. Now, I can see that as a part of empathy, but I define empathy more widely as the ability and willingness to step into the shoes of others and see a situation from the place of another. And I see that as a very much a conscious effort to exert yourself to do that. It's an intellectual exercise. It's not something that happens as a gut response, and sometimes it's uncomfortable and it isn't sort of such an immediate thing, and that's how I define empathy, and actually that's what he asks for. He calls that rational compassion. So this book was interesting for me, and I actually wrote notes and underlined a lot of them. I don't know if you can see that, flip it around at you, but I do that fairly often. I sort of put little notes in and things, especially when I think I'm going to disagree, but what I found was I didn't actually disagree. For the most part, we disagree on terms. This said, I am a very rational person morally. So for those of you who have a strong sort of sense of morality in your life, that morality is an important thing for you, but don't see it as a rational and sort of cold enterprise, may find this book really interesting, because I think the way I think about morality is quite different to the way most people do. So I think a few more people might actually disagree with him than I would. But the entire thing was very interesting, and I've actually watched a few of his lectures online about mostly sort of child psychology, and he seems really interesting as a person as well. He has a really interesting one on religion and essentially about why religion is different, and he is saying it isn't different to any kind of other method of thought, that you get the same belief patterns and things showing up in even like things like science and folk science, and I found that really interesting. So if you're into that kind of thing, then he has got some good ones online. But yeah, that's been my non-fiction in February, and only a few things, but I think I really enjoyed and engaged with all of them, and that's what I'm trying to do by reading less. So I think it's been a really good month for non-fiction. I will see you guys near immediately, I expect, in my fictional side of my February wrap-up. Alright, I'll see you there. Bye-bye.